Thank you so much. And good morning and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel on leveraging data analytics for AI for early warning and conflict prevention. And the objective of this panel is really to bring different actors, UN actors, civil society, and practitioners to examine how we go from data analytics to emerging AI approaches to shaping decision-making, and most importantly, have impact on the ground for conflict prevention, crisis response, and peace building. But the focus of today's discussion is rather than debating whether technology and AI is good or bad, it's whether trust is created or lost. Trust is at the center of the Secretary General New Agenda for Peace. We know that in conflict settings, trust is lost in 60% of the cases. And we know that trust is really at the center of effective dialogue between international organizations, states, civil society, and citizens and communities. And it is really an important capital to build social cohesion. So when we work in these settings as practitioners, we need to trust whether we need to build trust and also make sure that the information that we are basing our decisions upon are trustworthy. And so this is really what we will focus on today's discussions. But before we go into our debates, I wanted to introduce first and foremost my co-panelist, Minji Song from the Innovation Cell at DPPA. We also have with us Rajkumar Krishan from the UN Crisis Center. We do have also Caleb Goichi from Build Up, Avishan Bujnut, who is Information Management Head from DPPA DPO, and Corrado Scognamillo, who works for the UNDP Crisis Bureau. Today's discussions will be divided in two different rounds. The first round, which I will moderate, it will focus on how we move from analysis and data collection into action and impact on the ground. And the second one will really focus on what happens and what changes when AI enters into the picture. So perhaps with that, I will let Minji also give a little bit of the framing, and then we will move on into our two rounds, which will be based off questions from our end. There is at the bottom of your screen, you will find a Q&A chat box where you can ask questions throughout our webinar, and at the end we will read them and ask the panelists to respond. So with that, Minji, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ginevra. So as Ginevra said, each of these platforms moves data to decision-making in quite different ways. And these tools, we know, are actively in use in the UN's Peace and Security Pillar. So the question in the second round that I want to unpack is what breaks, what shifts, and what needs protecting when AI enters these chains. For those of us who use these tools to advise decision makers, the careful handling of data and interpretation of the data is, of course, paramount. So when AI enters with all its uncertainties, how do we hold on to trust and uncertainty? That is a brief framing, and back to you, Ginevra.
Thank you so much, Minji. So the first part of our discussions will focus on different platforms that our colleagues have been working on. And the question that we will ask the panelists is to walk us through how data moves from analysis to action, impacting your system. And in particular, we don't want you to provide us with the tools demo, but more we want to understand how this data collection then enters into shaping decisions and is translated into results and impact on the ground. So we will start with Raj, who's been working as Head of Information Management Unit for the United Nations Operations Crisis Center, and has been really his work has been focused heavily on the SAGE and Unite Aware platform. So Raj, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ginevra. I hope you can see my screen. Yep. So yes, good afternoon again, everybody. My name is Rajkumar Krishnan, Head of Information Management at the UN Operations and Crisis Center. So today I wanted to give a brief background on the UniteAware and SAGE tools that we are using in UN peacekeeping for situational awareness, and also as a means of data analytics that supports decision making. So UniteAware itself is fundamentally a program to support missions in terms of their ability to collect data on incidents, violations, and also patrols that are being undertaken, and visualize and analyze this information together with other thematic information to understand the reality on the ground and see if the mission is making the right operational decisions, and also what is the response to the situation on the ground. So just visually, UniteAware consists of several applications. SAGE is the application where incidents, violations, event data is collected. Patrol plans is where data on patrols are collected in terms of planning of patrols and the execution of patrols, tracking of patrols in real time. And together with that, there are multiple dashboards and map applications. So today I'm going to talk more about the SAGE application, which is where the data on incidents, violations are collected. So you might be interested to know that it's based on the open source tool called Ushahidi that was developed in 2007 for election crowdsourcing information in Kenya. But we found it to be a very useful tool for mapping the kind of situational awareness requirements that we have in peacekeeping. So based on that, we created SAGE, which is a common tool that is used across all UN peacekeeping missions to collect data on situational awareness from our different personnel on the ground, military, police, and civilian components. And we collect data on incidents, violations, also political humanitarian events, and also activities that the mission undertakes. What we have done with Ushahidi is that we've embedded workflows that enable verification and reporting of this information. So there's a workflow that brings it from the field, ground level, all the way up to the mission headquarters for reporting. And on the data analytics side, we have integrated it with automated Power BI dashboards, and as well as the S3 ArcGIS tool set for visualization. So here is just a quick interface. So this again is originally from Ushahidi, but we have tailored it to the requirements of UN peacekeeping. So all incidents that are recorded here are geocoded, they're categorized, and then they're available in Power BI for visualization. So here is an example of the kind of dashboards that we have, where we're able to quickly see trend analysis of incidents, where those incidents are occurring, who are the main perpetrators of incidents, and heat maps for hotspots. So everything in one place without requiring data manipulation or creating maps and charts manually. Everything's automated so that the decision makers have that information at their fingertips. And as I said, we've also incorporated ArcGIS into the picture, so you can see thematic information on the ground together with where incidents are occurring, where patrols are in real time. And we can also analyze to see if patrols are being sent to areas where there's a high concentration of incidents. And based on that, missions are able to redeploy their resources to areas where there's of higher concern. And since we are talking about early warning and AI, just wanted to also briefly touch on a project that we did with ETH Zurich, where we used SAGE data together with other ground information on natural geography, as well as people and economy information, to try to see if we could predict conflict in three mission areas: Central African Republic, South Sudan, and Eastern DRC. So this project went for 2 years, where we tried to use the data and try to see if we can use neural networks and deep learning, machine learning methods to predict conflict. So the outcome or the findings of this project, we found that we had a somewhat encouraging test results. 64% of outcomes accurately forecasted possible conflict zones in a 2 weeks to a month time frame. But we also found that the prediction performance was limited because of several factors. So one of them being the sparsity of data, meaning that for AI or machine learning to accurately predict outcomes, it needs as much information as possible. And quite frankly, in most locations, there hasn't been any recent conflict. So when we talk about locations, we are not talking at the country level or even subnational administrative boundary level. We are talking of like blocks of land in a grid space. So to clearly say whether there'll be conflict there or not, you have to have some kind of historical information that impacts that grid location. So just technically, it was just challenging because most grid locations have not had conflict in the recent past. So to say with confidence that there will be conflict in that space, it's a bit challenging, even for machine learning and AI. And also we had structural issues with SAGE as well, because we have a large number of incident categories, and this cover everything from large-scale armed conflict down to low-level everyday crime categories. So again, the number of categories, the way SAGE was set up to collect data at a granular categorization, that also impacted the ability of AI to meaningfully predict. And then we also tried to use the narrative of the incident provided by the users when they entered the data. But we found that the different styles and formats used by military, police, and civilians wasn't helpful in trying to come up with a uniform way of extraction that can be used for prediction. So those were some of the findings, but also on a more important level, on the lessons learned in the use of AI for conflict prediction or even early warning, what we found is that conflict prediction using AI itself is still a very evolving area of research. So for us in UN peacekeeping to make use of it, we really needed to be more developed and more advanced before we can trust the maturity of models and actually take action based on the results. So at this stage, it's still very much experimental. That's not to say that we don't see that it is useful, but clearly there needs to be more work on this area before we can actually implement it as part of UN or peacekeeping operations. And based on the current level of maturity, we found that it might be more suitable for research and analysis at a global level, and not necessarily in a peacekeeping setting, because I mean, first of all, we have a peacekeeping mission because it is a conflict setting. So you already know there is ongoing conflict or high chance of conflict. But on top of that, the UN peacekeepers on the ground, they have very intimate knowledge. They're subject matter experts on the situation in the missions that they operate. And they also have access to a network of ground information. So this information, almost intelligence, is something that to them is more actionable rather than an algorithm that is pulling data from lots of open source information to provide the inputs. So what we decided is that rather than focus on using AI for conflict prediction or early warning, we should really focus on using the data that we have on hand and use data analytics and visualizations to better support the use of data for early warning and help with the way that data is exploited. So what we are doing right now is, instead of using AI for conflict prediction or early warning, we want to use it to support the users in the way they collect data, help in data quality, and help in data exploitation. So for example, we want to reduce the data entry burden, because right now they have to categorize incidents and put in lots of fields in a form. So we want to use AI to try to extract as much of the incident metadata from the incident narrative, and thereby reduce the burden for the users. And that also improves the accuracy of the information, because currently the users are doing it manually, and there is different interpretation of the categories, and there's a lot of incorrect entries. So by using AI, we have consistency in the way the incidents are categorized. And we also want to see how we can try to use AI to what we call smoothen the incident narratives, meaning even if it's entered in different styles by different types of users, we can use AI to come up with a more uniform way of presenting that description. And we want to see if we can do alerts based on AI rather than prediction. And also, of course, everyone's favorite use of AI, summarizing data for reporting, such as the daily situation report and SGS report and so on. So from our perspective in UN peacekeeping, at this stage, we feel that we need to make better use of the data that is collected, support our personnel in exploiting that information, and then through that, by having a better data quality, and as in parallel as the AI technology matures, and together with other with the help of other researchers and academia in improving this process, we'll be in a position where this data is of a sufficient high quality at that time to make better use of AI. So I think that in a sense concludes my short presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rajan. If you're okay, we will tackle the questions at the end. But what is very interesting, and tying it back to the original theme that we discussed around trust, from what I understand, in the SAGE system, it's really the humans, the peacekeepers, that provide you that layer of trust in inputting the information, in gathering their own intelligence, and you use AI to enhance the data collection system to improve the quality. And so combining the two, it's what allows you to then do better forecast and analysis for decision making. So thank you so much for this, and this has been really interesting. I want to now turn to Caleb Gaichi, who is the Africa lead for the NGO Build Up, and Build Up has developed a tool called Phoenix for conflict prevention and data gathering, and a sentiment analysis, which is, as I understand it, is very much open source. And again, the same question remains as for the other panelists. We want to understand how you move from collection to action for better impact on the ground, but also how do you handle uncertainty in this case and trust? Over to you, Caleb.
Great, thank you so much, Ginevra. So I'll keep this short. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Can you see my slides? Great. So thank you so much for that introduction, Ginevra. So yeah, Build Up, we've developed Phoenix, which is a social media monitoring tool mainly designed by peace builders for peace builders, because we've understood that in this space, there's a gap. A lot of the tools that are being used are off the shelf, meant for commercial purposes. And these ones are mainly this one is mainly designed to just focus on peace building and not product and marketing. So how does it work? So the first thing is two bits. One is a problem statement definition, because a lot of the times, excuse me, a lot of the times peace builders will look at this space and just select a keyword and throw it on the platform and try to see what comes out of it, right? So almost like approaching these tools without a clear understanding of what are we trying to understand, and also what are we trying to understand, and is it possible to actually get that on social media? Because those are two different things. People will tell you that some tools can do magic and wonders and give you all the harms online, but it's also clear for you to design your problem so that we clearly show you, even when we work with some of these actors who are working with these tools, that there is almost sometimes major limitations to these tools to understand human perceptions of conflict, emotions and things like that. And what is mostly going to give you is just content that is locally available on public platforms. And then the next thing is to define where your data is going to come from. So is it going to come from Facebook, YouTube? Where exactly is it going to come from? And what that means is it pushes you to go back to your community and think about where the patterns showing up, where are people seeing this content, as opposed to you thinking that and then you end up collecting a very small percentage of the data set. So once you identify what your social media source is, so this is mostly on social media monitoring, then you run your scraper. So what Phoenix does is it allows you to use keywords, look at specific accounts that you have. So if you have a list of accounts, you can scrape from those ones. And if you also have keywords, you can also use keywords to collect your data. And then your data is structured into Phoenix, which is open source. And if you have an engineer on your team, you can grab the code and build on top of that. Or you can also work with us to give you an account for you to do your own monitoring. But once it gets to Phoenix, a couple of things happen here. You can basically run open source models that are AI models that are currently existing in Hugging Face to classify your data. So if you have, let's say, if you're in a particular country like Egypt, and there's a model that has been trained on hate speech data in that particular country, and you're collecting data from that country, so you don't need to classify it all over again. You can actually use that model on top of that data set, and it will do the classification for you. Alternatively, we also have our own inbuilt models that you can use and also run with that. So it really depends on where you're looking at and which country or context your data is coming from. So once you have that, your data set is now going to be visualized. And this allows you now to start looking at patterns and trends. So here you're thinking of, what are the dips? Where is harmful content peaking and where is it dipping? Are there trends of disinformation on a particular date or after an event? And we've seen this usually, especially when you're looking around peace building content, is where an event is followed by helpful content, or harmful content then precedes an event. And then you can see the correlation between what was said and what actually took place. So this allows peace builders to start thinking about how to navigate and engage now in this field. So the idea of this tool is to guide actors on what to develop next. So this is just a screen grab of what the dashboard looks like. So because it's open source, you can design it in any way that you would like. You'd feel comfortable in the type of metrics that you want to see. So here you can see one dashboard at the top visualizing content from Facebook, TikTok, X, and media articles. And then you can dive into a particular social media platform and see, for instance, on Facebook, what are the trends and how they're different, and also look at topics that are trending across different issues. So this is the dashboard that we were using for elections monitoring in Bangladesh. But what happens after that is once we have the dashboard set up and running, this is where now the rest of the piece comes in. So the first piece is mostly to identify where the harm is so that you can figure out what to do next. So with those reports, so those reports are now shared with peace building organizations that are currently working in that context, because now they know, for instance, that this particular issue is trending and we need to address it in a particular way to see, do we need to engage online with actors? Do we need to have conversations about this particular issue? So what that does is then these actors can go back online and start having what we call de-escalation issue conversations with other actors through different modalities. And then once they do that, that is also monitored to check for effectiveness, because sometimes you run campaigns, you engage with people online, but it's not really working, or you're only speaking to the choir. So this allows us to show, one, where is your conversation moving, and is it engaging with the people who are actually spreading the harmful content that we was seeing in the first place. Then the second bit is a track of work we've started engaging in for some time now, and this is on deliberative technologies, and basically having deliberative processes on digital platforms. So here the content is the content that is captured on Phoenix allows us to know what are the major issues that are being discussed online. So it doesn't necessarily have to be also monitoring hate speech only, but it can also help you monitor things that are of importance in a society or a community that people tend to have discussions over, and where sometimes misinformation can creep in. So based on this, we get people to engage with this content on platforms like WhatsApp, and then we invite them to have a conversation on a particular issue based on what is trending. So here we are basically moving them away from social media and saying, let's have a conversation about police brutality that is currently happening in our society, and how do we want to address that? And then this is where now the change happens. So beyond just social media monitoring and guiding us on what topics need to happen, then we move people into conversation spaces on police, on Reimage, or Talk to the City, where they can now have a direct conversation with one another, a deliberation on various topics that are of relevance to them, and then lead all the way to policy change. So we've done multiple tracks of these processes in different countries, but what we're doing is connecting what is currently happening online, so that you're not just having conversations with the public on things that are irrelevant, and then you're having low turnout, but you're almost matching what's currently happening online that is creating a lot of polarization, and then saying, let's move people away from that space and let's have a space of dialogue that they can actually engage in a inclusive and non-polarizing way. And then we've seen this lead to policy changes in 3 different tracks in Kenya. And what this shows us is then it can actually create a loop where you can just start to see, as conversations tick, how do you get people back to those, how do you get people to safe spaces where they can actually have meaningful conversations. Yeah, I'll stop there, and thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Caleb, for showing us how, this tool really interacts with the data that you get, and then you feed this data to relevant peace builders for their action, but you also then go and interact on these different dialogues that are ongoing, as you were saying, matching them and trying to kind of tune down the escalation of terminologies used. Thank you so much for this. Now I would like to turn to Corrado, who's been working on the crisis risk dashboard in the UNDP Crisis Bureau. And as I understand it, this is a tool where you aggregate different risk scores from different open data sources. So what would be really interesting, again, is to look at how you go from collecting and putting together all these different layers of data, and then how this data is then used to inform analysis, and what is the impact that you've seen on the ground. So Corrado, over to you.
Thank you, Ginevra, and great to be here. I hope you see my screen. And indeed, I'm happy to share our experience in how we move from data to analysis to inform decision-making so that our decision makers can trigger effective prevention and response, and ideally early action. I'll speak, as you said, on the basis of the experience that we have with building and rolling out a tool that we call the Crisis Risk Dashboard, or CRD, which is a tailored analytics platform for UNDP and in some cases for other parts of the UN. And there's three overall principles that we follow that I'd like to detail a bit here. It's one that we like to start with the actions, identify those and walk backwards from there. Two is that we try to co-design the platforms with the end users. And three is that as much as possible, we try to apply a systemic risk lens. So focusing on the actions and starting from there, what does that mean? Of course, it's particularly relevant for us at UNDP as we're a development organization that looks at the long term, but we're also, of course, impacted by the crisis and the crisis risks. And this is a simple visualization of three possible timelines. In the long term, we look at strategic planning, and that informs our overall strategies, what we call CPD, as country program documents. And here the question that we try to address is really, what are the risks that shape our CPD? How do we make them more risk informed? If we look at the mean term at the 6 to 18 months period, the question here is what needs to change? And it's about stress testing our annual work plans. And then in the short term, we're looking at an anticipatory framework. We look at weeks to months. What do we need to pause? What do we need to accelerate or change? And this is about scenario planning and trigger monitoring. And in each of these three timelines, there's a need for risk, a need for risk data, a need for data, and crisis risk dashboards that can be adapted to it. The second principle is about user-centered design. And this is really important. And what it means, it's really just that when a country office requests our support in developing a CRD, we start with defining as clearly as possible the applications, going really as detailed as possible, even in the outputs that they want to generate. Is it a PDF, a two-pager? Is it a PowerPoint? How often? Who does this go to? And while it's not always possible to be fully detailed, the more detailed, the better. So that's number one, really, identifying the applications and then agreeing on what is the starting point, what is the baseline, is there anything else that already has been going on in UNDP at the UN level or elsewhere that we can build on, and what are the capacities? And then secondly, we look at building a risk matrix. So, and that's where we apply the systemic risk lens. We come to the colleagues with a broad risk framework that is not prescriptive, but that encourages them to really have an overall multidimensional understanding of risk. We identify the risk factors together, and then we look for the indicators and the data sources. And then we start as soon as possible to develop a prototype. And from there, we do a continuous feedback loop and fine-tune the product that we then support over time. This is what it can look like in practice, or as an example, this is just a risk matrix with different dimensions. For each dimension, you have thematic areas. For each of them, you have sub-thematic areas, indicators, and data sources that we identify together, which we then ingest and visualize. And this is what it can look like as an example, under the hood. So Data sources can range from UN to government, to open source, to civil society, to private providers, depending on what we have in our data warehouse, but also what we find on purpose at country level and regional level. And these are a number of possible topics, from human development to crime, to hate speech, to climate and disasters. Looking at it from the more technical side, no need to go into details, but the flow here is that we have data sources that are either included on a data warehouse, and that can be newsfeed, can be events like ACLED, of course, or GDAX that monitors natural hazards, a series of macroeconomic and risk indicators or risk indicators about socioeconomic aspects, complemented with country-specific data. And technically, it's about combining data warehouse as a source and local drives that we have on the cloud that are connected through an SQL connector and then developed into dashboards through Power API. Let me finish with some examples to make this a little bit more concrete. We have developed rolled out crisis risk dashboards in more than 30 country offices and regional hubs in the past few years. We have a number of use cases that are documented, and this is a typology that is, of course, not mutually exclusive, meaning that you can have different applications in different countries. Situational awareness is the most basic one. We have seen that the CRD has been useful for our analysts to make their regular monitoring and analysis more evidence-driven. We have seen that it's been useful when different parts of the UN come together to share the data and access the CRD to get to this joint picture that we all want across the humanitarian development and peace nexus. We have seen cases where the CRD has been used for early warning, notably before elections, but also in like socioeconomic crisis type of settings like Sri Lanka a couple of years ago. Importantly, looking at the right side of the slide, the CRDs have informed our programming. So both at the strategic level, so the long-term that I was mentioning earlier, and at the programmatic level, so to inform the projects that we develop. And then last but not least, while the CRD is an internal restricted platform, everything can be ingested and used and shown in meetings, of course, and presentations. And we have seen that the data has made our messaging stronger in relationships with the government, with donors, with civil society. So that was a quick overview, and I'm handing it over back to you. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Goradon. Very interesting to see how you overlay different data sources and informations related to risks to then come up with different, actions going from situational awareness to early warning, programming, and advocacy. So this is really interesting in terms of going from analysis to action. I want to turn now to Avishon, working DPPA, DPO Information Management Unit. What do you see in terms of the infrastructure that you have done and the governance infrastructure in the UN system, particularly DPPA, DPO, and how data are filtered from the field and then to the headquarters for decision making? What can you tell us about this, and also in relation to trust, which was our central topic that we started off? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ginevra. Good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. It's a pleasure being back at Data for Peace conference. I know from my team, Iham was in Data for Peace conference, so I'm sure you all had great connections with him, and I can't wait to hear all that he has to say about this great conference. So Ginevra, you rightfully mentioned that for early warning, conflict risk analysis, specifically in peace and security, we highly depend on trusted data flows, not just more data. And the challenge today, I would say, at one point we had a lot of discussions and challenges around data collection. But now what's the biggest challenge is really connecting this data across different systems, organizations, entities that are operating on the ground to help support decision making. You saw an example of UniteAware. It's an excellent tool that is being rolled out in peacekeeping missions, and it's a great way for us to get data. But we need more data in different contexts for our decision making at the field and headquarters level. And again, UN possesses enormous amount of data. However, this valuable insight still remains fragmented across different organizations, entities, in different systems, and different governance frameworks in terms of how data is shared across different missions, different entities, and different organizations. So when I was working and supporting independent and strategic reviews of UN peacekeeping, I saw this challenge firsthand when we would reach out to missions to get access to this information, and it was quite a lengthy process to get the data that we needed to create analytics products. So now something that we are working on is establishing an internal data exchange platform and building on the success of Peace and Security Data Hub. Many of you know it. I don't want to demo it. It's psdata.un.org, where you can see and access public data from across UN peace and security. But creating an internal data exchange is something that is becoming more and more of a critical piece for digital infrastructure, for peace and security pillar. And again, the objective is not to create yet another standalone platform. Our goal is to bring in data from across systems to create a self-service, AI-ready data analytics ecosystem with a clear governance models. So in terms of what we are planning, and we are working in close partnership with United Nations Global Service Center in Valencia, Spain. And the key outputs of this initiative would be to establish a central data lake for peace and security by bringing together at the first phase unclassified data sets into a common environment, but also creating a governance framework, establishing SOPs that clearly defined data ownership, stewardship across different systems. We want to also ensure that information classification is in place. And luckily, we finally have a data privacy and protection officer at EOSG. We will be working closely to identify PIIs, ensure that we have the guardrails in place when there are PIIs in data sets, and ensure a very clear accountability mechanisms. We are also working with UNGSC to introduce frameworks around data quality assurance. It's not always easy, especially when it comes to the context of peace and security, but at least having some sort of standards, validation rules in place. And another thing is like really, it's important to improve the data lifecycle management to ensure the consistency and reliability of data. And one other area that we are also looking into and we discussed with UNGSC is to establish AI interoperability mechanisms, including introducing model context protocols, MCPs, to enable AI agents and application to securely access trusted UN data while operating within approved governance, security, and policy guardrails. And just maybe a quick example to say why it's important for UN to have its own model context protocols in the systems, in AI systems, is that if you go to use ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or DeepSeek and you ask about total number of fatalities in peacekeeping operations, you will get different numbers because these models look at different sources to pull out that data. One thing we are working on is to establish a set of data for consumption in AI models within the UN so that we get these numbers accurately, so that there won't be any discrepancies when users ask this information from the AI models. We are also working together with colleagues in DESA and UNICEF in partnership with, of course, with the OSG in establishing a data commons across the UN system. This initiative is going to be launched in September, hopefully. So that is an area that we are also coming together again as a way to show that as the UN, we are coming together to share our data and also get our data AI ready. So we are also looking into creating future AI capabilities such as natural language querying based on, again, trusted organizational data. And again, back to the point of the trust, Ginevra, as you rightfully mentioned, we say data fuels AI. So if you have the right data, your AI is going to provide you with the right content. But if your data is not governed, it's not accurate, it's not reliable, there's always going to be those challenges. I'll pause here and looking forward to this fruitful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abhishan. And I think this is a perfect kind of segue to the second part of the conversation, which is really about when AI enters these chains, how does that affect credibility and trust, especially for analysts and advisors? So maybe if we could go back to the kind of talking about the different layers and the different architecture, I want to focus on the input layer. Raj talked about the importance of human verification, and AI is used really just for summarization, etc. But Caleb, maybe you can talk a little bit more about this kind of the open source environment. I don't see you on the screen, but I hope you are still here. Yes, great. If you could kind of unpack a little bit about the open source environment when there's so much synthetic data, what does that actually mean for the trustworthiness of the input stage for Phoenix?
Yeah, thank you so much, Minji. And yeah, it's one of the things that I usually get a lot, especially working with the UN actors, where they say, well, is this data credible? And one of the things that I push back, I respond to, I say, yes, it is credible in the sense that it's data you're getting online. So that's the first thing. And then two, it's also telling you something about the ecosystem that you're working in. It's telling you that this ecosystem is being manipulated by a particular actor in the sense of whether the content is accurate or not. That's a different case altogether, and whether you're going to act on that content. But whether the content is fabricated is going to be really key for you to know, one, you're not dealing with humans. So even your response is not going to be about dialogue with another actor online. It's going to be about taking down bot networks, maybe through the collaboration with the social media company or something like that. But also it tells you that it's almost trying, there's a manipulation system there, that somebody's creating these bots, pushing these bots out to engage with the community, that it almost like it's no longer about my belief system, or it's about ideology in a conflict, but it's about an actor manipulating the ecosystem through which people are engaging with the content. So one of the things we do is when we collect this data, one is to look at how coordinated is the data pattern in the system. So AI can be really good at showing you that, because then you can see recurrent patterns, the number of times, let's say, an account is tweeting per second, or the similarities of content throughout 100 accounts, just using the same text, happening at the same day, same frequency, and things like that. Then you start to see some coordination online. So the point there to raise is just to say that the content might be trying to manipulate the public, and it's always good to fact check and say, okay, this is wrong content. But to ignore it altogether and only look for content that is coming from real humans, real accounts, or credible organizations is to mean that you're going to lose completely the actors who are manipulating that space, and the harms that are actually going unseen just because you don't want to look at bots. So just one of the things that we keep on looking at. And even one of the arguments we say is, if all the harmful content today disappeared online, we'd get worried, because the question will be, where has it gone? And we saw that on July 4th, when a lot of these actors were removed from Facebook and they quickly migrated to another platform. So it tells you hate moves, all these synthetic accounts will move, and the question is where. Yeah.
So interesting. And that's definitely something that we see in the innovation cell, that actually the kind of the incentives behind kind of manipulated content is actually as important than not seeing it, as you're saying. So very, very interesting. Just moving to the modeling layer and going to Corrado on the CRD, very curious that a lot of them, kind of the end products that we see on CRD is forecast or a risk score, whether that is kind of a number, a color, a trend. Would like to kind of push you in terms of how is uncertainty and how is the kind of questions around that kind of indicator communicated to the end user?
Thank you, Minji. I think this is a very important, maybe the core question that we face right now, especially as I feel like expectations have risen in our users compared to when we started thinking about CRDs almost 10 years ago. There is now an expectation of immediate response and forward-looking answers. We often hear that our CRDs are too static and not forward-looking enough, and we try to address that, right? But I think the answer to your question is what we try to do to indeed address those internal risks are. Number one is that we always present those models or the risk values as one piece of the full picture. We never only rely on the informed index, for example, or the conflict forecasting from ACLED. As good as those are, and they're great, but always presented as part of a fuller picture, one element in a data-driven picture that we offer our decision makers. That's number one. Number two is, of course, as I hinted to, that those that we use are scientifically sound, and we have done our homework in guaranteeing that. And number three, and I guess the most important, maybe the most basic, is that it's at the end of the day, it's our analysts, it's human judgment, it's human in the loop, and never an automatic linkage between a value, a color, an index, and a decision. I think that's what the answer is. Human analysts that are aware of the complexity of the dynamics that we deal with. And last thing I'll say, maybe just as a hint, also a connection with the first 2 days of the conference, is that we have these two projects that were presented in Stockholm yesterday and the day before, the Risk Anticipation Data Hub, which is about giving access to data and using natural language, and then Info Morning, which is precisely about using those models to generate alerts. And those are two ways that we try to apply those principles. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Corrado. I think the social science method of kind of disclaimers, of the kind of the triangulation of methodology, etc., it applies to also the use of AI and introduction of AI in the various kind of layers. Finally, let's talk about the infrastructure layer, and going back to Avishan. So across all these tools that we have been presented, control of the analytical stack is becoming very much central and structural. And this is very important for the UN. And I see some questions also in the chat related to this. But when analysts are, there's lots of different chains. So analysts are drafting in an enterprise LLM, let's say, missions are relying on commercial AI for translation, dashboards running on external clouds. What's a realistic short-term answer for trustworthy UN AI? And what does a long-term solution look like?
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I don't think any of us has the actual response, but I'll try to share some of my thoughts. I think knowing some of the challenges that we have with resources, I would say in the long term, I hope in the very near future, long term, we can focus and invest on establishing a sovereign data and sovereign AI infrastructure. And what I mean by sovereign AI data infrastructure is not about rejecting commercial technologies or just building everything ourselves. What I mean is just a sovereign AI that we retain control. So we have control over UN data, UN information, which includes UN beneficiaries, member states, and governance in a way that it sits in our own, data centers, in our on-prem platforms, where we have control over a lot of legal aspects of those infrastructure. And I don't want to get into too much details. We do have, of course, very clear legal agreements with our commercial vendors, but I think it's more and more important for us to also have our own on-prem infrastructure, specifically when it comes to data that is sensitive. So we need to kind of find a balance. A lot of the work of our colleagues do in, for example, DESA and Sustainable Development Goal and beyond are public data. And of course, a commercial vendor can easily help support with that infrastructure. But when it comes to some aspects of peace and security, where we have sensitive information, I think it's important to think about how we can invest in creating that sovereign infrastructure. You know, as international civil servants, we serve 193 member states, and we must ensure that the digital infrastructure also underpins our work in terms of neutrality, transparency of work aligned with UN principles of impartiality. So, and I think when it comes to commercial vendor, it's really important for us to avoid excessive dependency on one single vendor or commercial provider. And we need to very much diversify in terms of who we work with regards to our AI infrastructure. So it's very much about kind of us at the UN preserving the trust, neutrality, and ensuring multilateralism in the digital age, as we do in our day-to-day work as international civil servants. And another, I think, more of a technical area that I want to focus on is we also need to make sure that we avoid proliferation of AI agents without having governance around it. And that again goes back to the issue around cost. So we need to make sure that we control the costs. We have very clear returns on investment when we develop our AI solutions. And we need to also monitor the life cycle of the AI agents, avoid duplication of AI use cases. Raj mentioned summarization as being one of the main key AI use cases that we are seeing across the UN. So I think it's good to have maybe one AI agent that does the summarization for us instead of creating multiple agents across different missions and entities doing so. So it's really establishing a clear governance. And I think that's a very much a short-term, immediate thing that needs to happen to ensure that we reduce the cost associated with the licenses, with token usage, as we are seeing that the cost is increasing as we more and more start using and adopting AI solutions. So these are some of the thoughts that I have. I mean, there's a lot to say, but I'm going to pause, and I hope that I will also hear from the audience their thoughts around this really complicated, important topic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Avish, and I think we can go on for such a long time. Just again highlighting that these are the tools that we use in the UN Peace and Security Pillar. So the fact that we have all of these considerations, whether it's a Charter of the United Nations, whether it's governance, whether it's geopolitics, whether it's tech dependency, etc., these all inform our thinking when it comes to tool development. So I think that's a kind of a good way to end, but we have a little bit more time, and I want to kind of do a rapid fire kind of round of question. And this is a little bit more future leaning. Quick line, a few lines each, please, panelists. So let's say 3 years into the future, there's one capability that you would want your system to have that it doesn't have today. And what is that one thing that needs to stay human no matter what? I'll start with Raj.
Thanks, Minji. Yeah, I think again, extending from my presentation, we actually want to do conflict prediction. We want to give our peacekeepers the ability to quickly identify areas, because in like some missions like in DRC or South Sudan, you have a huge land space that you have to monitor. So we only have limited boots on the ground, so to speak. And with the recent budget constraints, it's becoming more and more difficult for our peacekeepers on the ground to have that ability to monitor huge, vast spaces on the ground. So we still are very hopeful that the ability to predict conflict or conflict events, at least within small geographical areas, this matures and provides the ability for our peacekeepers to have more informed analytics and early warning so they can act on it. So I don't think it's too far away, but we are hopeful that it comes very soon so that our peacekeepers have something really meaningful to use from AI on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. Caleb.
Very quickly, I think for me, it would be peace analytics. And I think there's a lot of focus on the harm, on the conflict. We've become very good at identifying the problem, that sometimes the response becomes under invested in. So what does it mean to be a peaceful society in digital spaces or offline? What does that look like? And how can our tools guide us into that? There's less peace analytics and more of conflict analytics, I think. So we would want to lead into that.
Great. Avishan, you're muted.
Yeah, so I think what I would like to see is an AI that empowers every single peacekeeper to use their expertise, to use their knowledge, to do more with regards to mandate delivery, and have AI do the manual work that is just too time consuming, and it really does not require human expertise. I mean, many of our colleagues in the mission come with years and years of knowledge and expertise in peacekeeping, peace building, and we want that knowledge to be purely used in the work rather than doing manual work. So I'm looking for an AI that does the manual work so that we can focus on what our expertise are. Thanks.
Great. And lastly, Corrado.
Thank you, Minji. This is a great question. I think I'll go back to my point about systemic risks for us at UNDP. I think one great capability, and I think this is realistic to consider, is if AI could help us in identifying correlation between risk factors and understand the complexities of crisis and what lies behind and the structural drivers and how they're connected between them. That would greatly help. But you also asked about one thing that we want to keep within human hands, and I think that's the last step between analysis and decision making that needs to be always human-led.
Great. I hear common strands that humans and kind of our UN colleagues should do what we're good at in terms of human analysis, and let's automate as much as possible complexity, but also the very manual work. Ginevra, back to you.
Thank you very much. We have very few minutes for some closing remarks, but I think from the discussions that we had, I mean, there's one expression that resonated with me from Corrado, which kind of captures all, it's humans in the loop. So we all want to use the new technology and data analytics techniques and AI to improve the work that we do. And you all highlighted the different possibilities that actually those tools that you're all using, allow you to make better decisions, to have an impact on the ground, but ultimately to have, gain, and sustain the trust of the communities that we are mandated to serve, we also need humans in the picture to verify the data, to apply their analytical lenses to all of this information. And even sometimes, the example that Caleb, you were using, even sometimes even the data that are bad data, so to speak, are actually something that you can act on and you can have a positive influence in the spaces where you're operating. So I think this has been a very fruitful discussion, lots of food for thought, and I hope that will enrich also the discussions of our colleagues that have been following us online. And so this is all from me. I'm Ginevra Cucinotta from the UN System Staff College. And of course, if you're interested in learning opportunities on data, peace and security, you can also reach us at UNSSC at peaceandsecurity@unssc.org. And we also work very closely with some of the colleagues that are present in this webinar. Over to you, Minji.
I actually don't know if we have time because I see Branka's face coming up and I think she's going to close us. But just to say, thank you so much to the panelists and also to the questions in the Q&A. Such a shame that we can't be there in person, but the fact that we had such a virtual session and we could exchange as kind of, in a peer-to-peer fora. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Branka, and back to you.